So I want to talk about some dilemmas of the self. And I'm just going to surface a few. This isn't in no way a comprehensive list of the dilemmas of the self. I wish it were. Sadly, us human beings are funny old creatures and we have all sorts of stuff going on. But the first thing I see is the idea of the certain self. The certain self is the person that says, I am this kind of person. I'm very impatient. Oh yes, very impatient. I can't be doing fools. No, I don't suffer fools gladly because I'm impatient. Or they say something like, I'm a natural born procrastinator. I just can't seem to do anything. Are you going on holiday this year? Yeah, I booked that really quickly. You know, they're not a procrastinator, but they shape themselves as a procrastinator where it seems to suit them. But they have a sense of certainty around who they are, like as though it's a fixed thing. We could call those guys the essentialists when it comes to the self. They believe at some unconscious level there's an essence to their self, and that they're certain they know what that essence is. I never forget reading a wonderful book by Milan Kundera called Immortality. And he refers to this lady who runs into this cafe and goes, oh, I've been to the gym and I've just had a shower. I cannot live without a shower after the gym. And he talks about how this character is essentially trying to find certainty in who she is by the trivial things in life. Of course she can live without a shower, but by saying it in such a forceful way, she starts to determine who she's showing up as. That is the certain self. Now that's great, a certain self is wonderful if it serves you. I'm pretty sure Donald Trump is a certain self. And I'm pretty sure, at least from what I can see, he seems pretty happy with his life. Why would you want to change that certainty if it's serving you? But how many of our clients come to us with a certain self that is serving them? Very few. Very few indeed. Most people come with a certain self that is not serving them, which is holding them back. It's fossilized their trajectory, their narrative. Does that make sense? So one of the things I'd suggest we start to look at is when somebody says, and we talk about this on the course, is that when they say things like, I am this kind of person, we start to challenge, are you that kind of person? Are there times you haven't been that kind of person? Maybe we can explore how they're just being that kind of person. Not that they are that kind of person, they're just being that kind of person. But tomorrow they might be a different kind of person. Can they accept that fluidity? Can they start to at least question the possibility that they're not who they think they are? And I think all too easily we fall into the trap of assuming somebody knows thyself and then sticking with it. Rather than saying, well, how certain are you of this thing? And indeed, can you ever be certain of this thing? So the first thing and I think this is a foundational one for us, by the way, as coaches, is the certain self. It's what we see pretty much all the time. Very few people come and say, yeah, I'm coming for coaching, I'm very fluid in my approach to life, and I could be anyone, I can shape myself brilliantly. No, they come and they say, I'm this kind of person, I'm that kind of person, I'm being held back because, all that kind of stuff. That's the certain self showing itself. So then we have the violated self, and I think the violated self is the, if you like, the corollary of the certain self. It's the natural consequence of the certain self. Because if you have a certain self and you do something that's against the certain self, you violated who you think you are. Who can, you don't need to share this, but who can think of a time in your life when you've acted how you would describe, looking back, as inauthentically, or perhaps against your own standards? Or you think, oh, did I do that? That's terrible. You know, who can think of a moment in their life when they've had that feeling? There's a little show of hands, you don't need to tell us. Yeah, most people. So where does that feeling come from? And maybe it's not strong for you, maybe it is. I don't want to explore individually. But if there's a strong feeling attached to that, like, oh God, I can't believe I did that, that's just terrible. What kind of person was that? All that sort of stuff. That's your violated self. At some level, you violated your own identity. Whereas actually, have you violated it? Was that who you were being in that moment? And now you're being somebody different, and then tomorrow you'll be somebody different. Each of those beings having a different set of values in a different context, and a different set of beliefs and assumptions in a different context. And the great thing about the self is that very often those beliefs and those values feel relatively stable. And it doesn't matter what context you're in, they feel relatively stable. So that's our continuity of self. That enables us to go, oh yes, well I'm me, and I know me. But how well do you know you when you're not being you? And then you start to blame yourself for not being you. But actually you are you. One of the things I've argued for a long time is this idea of authenticity is kind of nonsense, really. Whatever you're showing up at in the moment is the authentic you. That's why you're doing it. It's not as if there's an authentic you that is the platonic ideal form. The idea of authenticity is rather like the Platonic form. It exists up there, and we strive to be it. If only I could be the ideal Nick. Where does this ideal Nick exist? And yet that's what we think was authenticity. I wasn't really being the authentic me. I wasn't really being honest. If I'm, you know, yeah, it's a shame. I wish I could be a better person. That's just who you're being in the moment. This idea of shame is really about how somebody's attaching meaning to a self. So when we're working with people who feel shame as incapacity, maybe rather than exploring what they could do to make amends, or maybe we could to manage their emotion, maybe we could look at their relationship to the idea of the self. The concept that the self isn't a fixed thing. By the way, if you've got any questions as we're running through, feel free to just shout. Yes, Robert, yeah.
So when we talk about being authentic in the coaching relationship, is that, from your perspective then, is that about just being who you are in that moment within that relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are a number of things that for me come up with that. One is the idea of what a coach should be. So being authentic as a coach is different from being authentic as a human being. Just as a firefighter can't turn up to a fire and go, do you know what, today I'm a firefighter, but I am not going to fight fires today. I think I'm going to go and have a cigarette by the cafe. That's not authentic firefighting, is it? So I think there's different kinds of authenticity. There's the authentic professional, but there's the authentic human. And I think what maybe you're alluding to is this idea of what happens when two selves come together. And how authentic are you in that space? I think it's a question which needs personal negotiation, let's say. In that I think you can be utterly brutally honest at any given moment in any situation, but it might not be the best thing to do. And so there's a degree of, if you like, negotiation of what you're trying to achieve in that space for the client. If, for instance, you make a note of every single thing that they do that you perceive as an issue, and you go, oh, you just did that again. Oh, hold on, you did. No, don't forget. And you did that. It would be never-ending pointing out potentially of your little weird authentic realizations. But is that the right space to create for the client? So I think it's a negotiation thing. I do believe in authenticity as a coach in the sense of sharing what's coming up for you really, but to a measured degree, just because of the effectiveness as a professional. Help?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Just one thought really about the certain self. Just thinking about it could sometimes also be the certain others, like as what you see from others is often a reflection of yourself. For example, I can have clients saying, oh, he must want to undermine me at work, but that could reflect his own fear rather than what other people. So I just thought it's interesting when you say about the certain self, sometimes what you see in others is also another form of certain self.
I agree, absolutely. And of course we talk about projection in coaching and psychotherapy and so on. And a lot of what we see is a projected experience, isn't it? But actually you're absolutely right about the other two. So one of the other philosophers who talks a lot about the self is Hegel. And Hegel talked about the idea of the self only becomes aware of itself when it meets the other. And that the self is an unaware, unself-aware thing until it encounters the other. And in the encountering of the other, the self starts to define itself, to shape itself, to make itself. So you're spot on. And of course, how they reflect on the other is massively a reflection of themselves. One of the things that's interesting is I've just been having conversations around this very recently myself about certain things. And it's much easier to do this as a coach than as a human being. It's much easier to be able to explore the self with somebody else than necessarily to see how yourself is selfing, unless you've got somebody at the house to reflect that with you. So that's the violated self. Then there's the uncertain self. The uncertain self, to me, when it comes to coaching, is the self that wants to be certain. This isn't the uncertain self that's like, hey, I'm kind of like enjoying just going with the universe. No, this is the uncertain self that's going, I just don't know myself. If only I knew myself, all my troubles would be over. If only I could figure out what I want in life. If only I knew what my choices were. If only I knew where my trajectory was taking us. They tend not to say that. But that's the uncertain self who's struggling with uncertainty. Now, I don't want to go heavily into existentialism here, but one of the joys of existential thinking, actually, for me, is the acceptance of uncertainty, the embracing of uncertainty, the realization that we live in an uncertain world. And the more we try to pin down uncertainty to certainty, the more problems we create for ourselves. Because we're trying to do something which existentially is simply impossible. We can't make of this world something that we can predict. And so the uncertain self presents itself as wanting certainty. So again, if we start to work with the client on how they relate to the idea of their self, and start to work on could they be comfortable with the idea of uncertainty? Could they be comfortable with the idea of emergence rather than determinism? Does that make sense? When I talk about emergence and determinism, I mean determinism is as in I want to be this, I want to go there, I want to do this, etc. Determining the outcome rather than could it emerge for me? And one of the things I'll be asking you to do later, if you want to work with the idea of being, is to start working at the emergent level, not the deterministic level. Okay, then there's the mirrored self, and this comes back a little bit to what you said, Jesse, which is the idea of the mirrored self is the self that defines itself through others. I don't necessarily mean socially, because in a sense we all have that aspect, but rather defines itself by how other people see them. Or is concerned to be seen in a certain kind of way. And so they're wanting to define themselves by how people are seeing them. So my last client is a great example, who realised through the coaching with me that most of her decisions were about how she managed other people's perceptions of her. If I do this, they might see me this way. If they see me that way, I might get this result. If they see me this way, I might feel this way about my life. In other words, she was mirroring all the others in her social context. In terms of how we might work with that kind of person, what are your thoughts? Let me throw it back to you. How might you work with a mirrored self? Think about the questions I asked you earlier.
I just asked them, who are they?
Who would they like to be, maybe? Yeah. If you say who are they, they're going to struggle probably. But who would you like to be? It's a lot easier to answer. And it starts to create the selfing process away from the mirror. That's a great question. Who would you like to be? Because if you look at who they've been, there's a good chance all you get is a load of reflections. You know that Bruce Lee film, Enter the Dragon? And at the end he's going after the baddie, and he ends up into this mirrored hall, do you remember? And everywhere he looks, there's a different baddie. It's the same guy, but all different angles. Or if you think about Picasso's idea of the fragmented person, in a sense, if you think about the mirrored person, you're getting that fragmented person. So then we're going to have the complete self. The complete self is somebody who not only is certain, or maybe they're uncertain, but they're aiming for some level of completion. The certain person might be open to the fact that they might shift. They might be an non-confident person, but they might want to be confident. So they're certain and non-confident, but they want to be confident. The complete person is like, I am fixed in stone. Or they want to perfect themselves in some way. I've known people who work on themselves, they never stop working on themselves, and somehow, if they just keep that extra bit of work going on their mental, psychic processes, they'll become a better person, rather than accepting where they are. Does that resonate with anyone? This idea that I mean, maybe you've experienced it, where you feel like, if I just keep working on this bit of me, if I keep working on that bit of me, if I go to this course and that course, and if I go to that person and this person, and eventually I'll be okay. Rather than just kind of being okay now, but open to the change that life brings. Okay, so the last one is the ideal self. And this is a little bit like the one I've just talked about, is that they have a vision of who they want to be in the future. I want to be this kind of person. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. The question for us as coaches is that serving them? Is the ideal self serving them? Or is it what's the word I'm looking for? Is it a sort of a measurement against which they can't... I'm losing my brain now. A measurement they can't sort of get the points up against, if you like. So they're like, I want to be this ideal self, but I'll never be that person. I want to be the person, the guy that walks into the room and everyone goes, oh, I want to be the woman who has it all. That's the ideal self. It's not who you are, is it? It's not who you're being. It's who you're aspiring to be at some level, which is causing you pain, which is causing you struggle. Any thoughts or questions on the self dilemmas before I move on? Yeah, listen.
What's the difference between the complete self and the ideal self? I don't quite see the difference.
The complete self, actually, for me, is I was thinking about this morning actually, and I mildly misdescribed it then. For me, the complete self is the one that thinks it is already a finished thing. The ideal self is the person that has a projection of who they should be. So you might think of that as sort of the Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. That's who they should be. It's their ideal. It's their platonic form in a sense. The complete self is they're not going to change. They are the finished product.
Oh, they think.
Yeah.
Ah.
So forget the bit about perfect themselves. That's the ideal self. They think they're a done deal.
And they're okay with that. So is that?
Well, they may or may not be.
They may or may not be. Okay.
If they're okay with it, fine. We don't need to worry about that in coaching,
Right.
do we? The question is it serving them?
Right, okay.
Is being a complete self serving them? Or is it making life a little bit difficult for them? That's all we care about. We don't care about what's true. We care about what's serving them. What's part of the problem they brought to you? Because presumably there's something they brought to you, you know? We don't coach people who don't want to be coached, do we, generally? So if they want to be coached, the question then is this self that they've got part of that problem or not? Okay, so let's talk about growing the self. This is, for me, where you guys come in as coaches. Everything we've looked at so far is kind of like the foundational stuff, but how do you help that person grow? How do you help them develop a sense of what their self can be, or that it's okay to be where they are right now, etc., etc.? Well, for me, the first thing is to start to understand their map of the world, their model of the world, or sometimes called their worldview. What are the existential assumptions that they hold? What are their assumptions about the self? Its changeability, its mutability. What are its it is a human being, by the way. What are the person's beliefs around how the universe works, spiritual or scientific or otherwise? Start to flesh out. This is my point where I talk about shining the light in the cave. Try to let the client understand who they're being right now in terms of their belief systems, their behaviours, their emotions. Sink into their feelings. How are they feeling about this? But don't just go, how do you feel? And they go, sad. Okay, what do you think you should do? Because you're not sinking into the feelings. Understand, where does that sadness come from? What does it reflect about them? How are they like to feel? You know, really try to sink them into the present. So when I talk about Arnold Bleissner, about change happens in a place where you are, not where you want to be. Sink them into that place. It's interesting, one of the things I always make sure I do is when I look at who they want to be and who they are being right now, is I make sure I do the who they are being right now second, not first. In other words, I leave them with where they really are, not where they aspire to be. Why? Because I want to really identify with where they are right now. It's too easy to project some illusion of a future self and forget where you are. So let's project the future self they want to be, but then bring them back to where you are right now. And it sounds negative, and sometimes it feels negative, I must say, to the client. But it's much more effective than having some escapism, which is what sometimes, if you project too far into the future, without sinking them into the present, it can be quite escapist. So sink them into the present in terms of what are they really feeling, what's their world view, what's their psychological view of the world, and their existential beliefs around it. And make sure they understand who they're being. What are the behaviours that are coming out of their being? What are the thoughts that are coming out of their being? Sink them right into the present. Does that make sense? I think too often as coaches we're keen to move them forward, to push them to where they want to be, rather than where they are. And I say shine the light in the cave where they are. When I was coaching my last client, she realised that she has this mirrored self, that she wants to essentially be seen in a certain way, and all behaviours are seen in a certain way. And she said, okay, Nick, well, now I've realised that, what do I do? And I said, well, look, I'm your coach, and if you really want to look at what you do, I will do, because I'm your coach. But I believe my responsibility is to keep you here, right now, and stay where we are and look around. She talked about being in the woods, so I said, stay in the woods, look at the undergrowth, seeing what's growing there, and why you're here, rather than trying to run out of the woods, because what's outside the woods? Perhaps another set of woods. Maybe if you don't see what's brought you here, you'll just fall into another place over there. And my responsibility, I said, is to do that for you. Are you okay with that? She goes, yes, you're right. Now, you might say that's prescriptive coaching to some degree. I'm okay with that. I feel I have a role and a responsibility. And when I'm working ontologically, i.e. on being, I don't want that person rushing helter-skelter into actions because they're not ready for it. That's my assumption, by the way. Any thoughts on growing this up? I did tell you I don't teach techniques. I just don't do techniques. It's about being present with your client, fully present. Any questions? I'm going to talk about the self-lens in coaching. Any thoughts? Okay, cool. So the last bit then is the idea of the self-lens. I suppose what I mean by the self-lens is what I talked about earlier about the optician, is don't assume that this thing is what you have to do, nor assume that it's true in some way, that it has some external validity. This is just a lens through it to look at the situation in front of you. This is a lens to try on and see how it works for the client, to view their problem through. Almost imagine if you had a camera and you put a different coloured filter on the front of the camera, and through doing that you end up with a different experience of what's being seen. That's the lens. And I think too often we look for the answer, the method, the model. And I would love for you guys as coaches to get to the point, and I appreciate some of you quite early in your journey and some are much further on, but I'd love you to get to the point where you say to yourself, my job is to be here with this person, present as I am, as a being, with this person, and to let them show up. That's all. Not to do something to them, not to have a model to take them on some kind of journey, but to be present for them. And that is, for me, where the two selves start to come together. The selfing process of two people. And that's why I doubt, nowadays, the person-centered approach. So I think the person-centered approach is predicated on the idea that somehow we can provide a pure space where we don't impact the client, where somehow we offer a non-biased, non-polluting, non-colouring space. I'm not convinced that's possible. I think you always bring colour to your coaching. You bring a lens through which you see the person, and as you start to use that lens, you ask certain questions. You take them in a certain direction. You look at their existential issues rather than their behavioural issues. And I think that's okay. And I think the two of you can start to shape each other. Now there's one thing that comes out of that though, which is that the space you create as two people is unique to you. So then what happens when they leave you? What happens when that space you created, which is uniquely yours together, doesn't exist because they leave the coaching room and they go back to the workplace where they see themselves perceived in this way or that way, or they go back to the partner where they see themselves perceived in this way or that way, not by you but by a new human being, a new self. What happens to their realizations, their thoughts, their beliefs, their discoveries and their decisions that they take with you? So there's one last thing I'd like to leave you with, which is this idea of patience. I'm going to counsel you, when you're working at an ontological level, to have patience.
No, but that's what we discussed as well, like being kind to yourself and having patience and waiting.
Being kind to the person too. Because what I've seen happen a lot in coaching is we get frustrated by why the person hasn't why the person hasn't done what they said they were going to do. Why haven't they changed the way they said they were going to change? Could they not change faster? I thought we'd agreed in this space that they were going to do this, but now they come back and they tell me they haven't. Or they've even changed their mind. Worse still, they don't even want that thing anymore. What happened to that thing we agreed? Did I waste my hour? Those are all things that we start to feel potentially because we see that person as an entity unaffected by us. But actually they are affected by us. They're affected by us as coaches. They're affected by the space we create. And in that space they feel and think certain things that maybe they won't feel and think outside. That's okay, that's human. But let's acknowledge that what happens in coaching is not necessarily what they take out of coaching. And be patient with them to discover what they really want, not what they want in that moment with you.
Just on that point, what came to my mind was the fact that when you ask the client when they come back, what did you get out of the last session? And it's amazing because it's often what you think that they got out of the session. So, okay, well that's good. You know, it's not what you expected. Just to reflect on what
Very
you
much
just
so.
said there.
Or they just totally cast off everything that they
Yes.
said because they had this realization, actually, they don't want it after all.
Yeah.
And all that hard work you put in has gone. That's okay. That's the person selfing. That's the person discovering themselves in a new space. So long as you maintain your integrity, to keep growing the space with them, to keep exploring where they are right now, not saying, but hold on, you said you wanted this. That's okay to say, by the way, so long as it's about, so where does that bring us now? But you say it in a non-accusatory way, i.e., I noticed last week you said you wanted this, but that seems to have changed. Where does that bring us now? That's okay, but you said you wanted that. It's not okay. Obviously, you guys are at different stages, but I'll tell you a little story. A few years ago, I was on a trekking trip, and weirdly enough, one of the people on the trek was a client of one of the coaches that we were training. And she came up to me halfway through and said, Nick, can I have a chat with you? It's about one of your coaches. And I said, okay, what's happened? And she said, can you have a look at this email? Tell me if that's okay. So I looked at this email and it said, Dear X, please can you take a moment to go to Nick and give him 3 good reasons why I should continue to work with you. You failed to do X, Y, Z. Each time we see each other, your goals change. And I think you're not taking coaching seriously. And I want you to tell Nick if I should continue to coach you. I was like, oh, I could not believe what I was seeing. Now, of course, I know you guys wouldn't do that. But it really brought home to me how easy it is for us to sink into a place where we think that what we've created is a sort of a permanent thing. That somehow what we do in this moment has to last. And if it doesn't last, it's because they're not committed, or they're just flaky.
That's an attachment to a result that isn't ours to own, isn't it? That's...
Yes, it certainly is, but I feel it's more than that. I feel it's about not realising that people, through going on a coaching journey, naturally shift all their paradigms. And that by the paradigm shifting, the stuff they thought they wanted at the start is no longer relevant.
That's why you shouldn't have that attachment
Absolutely.
to it.
Well, I think it's a valid question at some point. Well, no, not the way...
Give Nick 3 reasons why.
No, not in that approach,
Yeah.
but I think there comes a point where you... Well, certainly I would, as a coach, question whether I want to continue that relationship. And maybe because in what I do, there's certain... It's not performance coaching, but there are certain aspects where I need my clients to commit and to do certain things, and if they don't, then there's no point to what we're doing, in which case, you know, that would be a conversation we have to have. Not in that way, because I always think, you know, they came to me to begin with.
Yeah.
There might be something else going on for them, that they maybe sabotage their progress, or there might be something else.
Yeah.
But it's a conversation that you might need to have at some point.
Well, yeah, it absolutely is. I think there are a couple of things here. It's okay to go off script a little bit in terms of what we're covering here. It's a bit more technical, if you like. But it all comes down to the contracting, in the sense of what do they contract at the start, and what are they contracting as they go through with you mentally? What's the mental contract that you're forming with them? Because if they come for a performance issue, and they're not doing the performance thing, but that's your thing, if you like, then working on the self might not be appropriate. However, what I'd counsel you against is, forget the level of impatience that person displayed, I would counsel you against impatience being the motivator for that conversation. Rather, the conversation should be one of curiosity, not of impatience. You've come to me, and there's a change you wanted, but that's not happening. What's going on here? It's different from, why are you not doing what you said you'd do? You know, it's a huge difference. I would always say to you, get curious about why people don't do things rather than get fed up that people don't do things. Wonder what's happening for them in that space. In fact, one of the things I'd say to you as well, by the way, guys, is treat everything that happens in that coaching space as information. I don't mean information in the sense of storing it up on some kind of mental database and trotting it out at some point, saying, yes, but you did that 3 times and this 2.7 times. I mean that it provides you with a sort of a much richer understanding of the whole experience that client has. How they pay attention to you or don't pay attention to you, whether they're late or early, whether they don't do what they say they do or they do what they say they're going to do, whatever it might be, all of that is information. It isn't like some part of it is useful for coaching and some parts it's outside of coaching. Like, you're late. That's not a coaching issue, that's a you're naughty issue. No, that's a coaching issue. What's made them late? What's the pattern that makes lateness the norm? Or is there something about the lateness which is reflecting on the feelings towards the coaching? Whatever, it doesn't matter. The question is, how is this stuff they present you with, the whole experience of their self, relevant to the coaching journey? Rather than saying that some bits sit outside as like this is the non-coaching part and here's the coaching part. No, it's all coaching, because it's about a human being showing up in some way. Well guys, I've come to the end of my talk. Are there any final questions before I close off?
I propose this being disappointed when people don't do the things that they said they were going to do.
Right.
I know I came from the wrong place when I did this, but well, let me tell you, and you can tell me how bad I am.
How bad you were being.
I sent a client, after 6 practice sessions with the client, I sent a summary of all of the tasks that she said she'd like to do in all of the different sessions, which I can see, there was an urge to be helpful there, but that I know that in myself I was thinking, look at what you didn't do.
Okay.
You know, I know that it wasn't coming from a great place necessarily, but I did also want to be helpful. I wanted to say, these are all the things you said you want to do. I wasn't saying...
Did you put little ticks and crosses by them?
No.
Phew.
I liked her very much, actually, yeah, but she was just... I kept saying to myself, she's flaky, she's not doing the stuff, you know.
Nobody's flaky.
This will be helpful, this will be helpful.
Not a single human being on this planet is flaky. You know, I really don't believe that there's such a thing as a flaky person. The question that I think we should ask as coaches is what's their behaviour about? Nobody's flaky. We don't. Show me a flaky baby. You know, that's not how it works. What happens is people follow routes that really don't make them happy, or don't give them meaning, or if somebody don't fulfil them. Yeah, of course they're flaky at that point, but that's their behaviour, not a state, not an essence. So sometimes, I mean, there's a great example of the idea of essentialism, is to say she was flaky, or she is flaky. No, she's not. She's a human being in a certain context which is producing certain behaviours because of the beliefs, values and so on, assumptions she's developed over a lifetime. But that doesn't make her flaky. She can find a new way of being if she wants to, if it matters to her. And as a coach, you can be part of that journey, or you can call her flaky. That's open to all of us to do as a coach, is to be part of somebody's journey, or to judge them by our essentialist standards, if you like. Make sense?
I find actually a client not doing what they said they were going to do a perfect avenue for exploration.
Yeah.
I'm actually pleased with that because it opens it up. Right, okay, here we have something to get our teeth into. You said you're going to do something you haven't. Let's explore this. Why have, you know, in a very coachy way, but why have you not done this? What is it? What do you think prevented you? All this. So I actually like when they do it because it's, aha, we've got something really solid to work on there.
And I think when you have something like that, the change that you can bring about for the client is then deeper, because then it's not about, oh, I've done that, I really should have done, but you are then analysing, why are you not doing the things that you want to do? Possibly there's a payoff for them. And by helping them doing that, when your relationship with them, the coaching relationship has ended, you know, that might have unravelled something for them that enables them to take more action in the future, which is why it becomes so interesting.
Yes, you're right. And I also think that we should think of coaching in the context of the whole of that person's life. I think sometimes we think of coaching as this thing they get and it does the change. It doesn't. It's a part of a much wider context. There might be one person who said something to them that's part of the context for change. There might be you, the coach. There might be the parents. There might be the partner. There might be somebody at work. There might be a television program they watch, a film they see, a book they read, a sunset they observe. All those things are part of the big picture of what's creating change for that person. You're just one part of it. And I think sometimes we overestimate our role in somebody's change process. We're just a part of it. We facilitate a certain journey within that. But around that human being, for the other 23 hours of the day that are not with you, plus the fact that's only once every week or 2 weeks, so actually there's many hours without you, They're experiencing stuff non-stop. And yet we think our coaching is the bit that creates the change. Pretty unlikely, isn't it? I think you brought up something really important for me, you guys, which is this idea of the paradigm they're existing in. And the self doesn't create the paradigm creates the self. If the self is something we do actively, rather than something which is an essence, then it's the paradigm they're existing from which creates the self. And then the self, yes, it will make conscious thoughts around the paradigm and justify it or solidify it, but it's the paradigm that creates the self. The minute we start to shift the paradigm in different ways, the self will start to move, rather than vice versa. We shift the paradigm, the self will start to shift with it. And that can take time. We have no idea. One of the things I think is beautiful about the world, but also really, really annoying, is that the future is utterly 100% unpredictable. We just don't know. And we have to trust the client as well to forge themselves in this world until the minute they die. That's our job, is to be part of that, a tiny part of that journey. But knowing that they're forging themselves throughout their life, they are selfing, either consciously or unconsciously, all through their life. And they might be selfing in unuseful ways or in useful ways. But either way, they're always selfing.
And so are we.
And so, well, I'm not. I'm complete. So, guys, thank you for letting me be myself tonight, and thank you for being yourself tonight. We're going to convene to the bar now. So, thank you very much, indeed, for a lovely evening, and see you for a drink.
Thank you.